This is Duncan Trussell. He's a Buddhist, a stand-up comedian, and as far as I'm concerned, a philosopher. He's also the creator of the animated Netflix series, The Midnight Gospel. The Midnight Gospel is an adult animated series that follows Clancy, a spacecaster, a podcast, but in space, with a malfunctioning multiverse simulator who leaves the comfort of his home to interview beings living in dying worlds.
My name's Clancy. I'm a spacecaster, and I wanted to know if maybe you'd like to be interviewed for my spacecast. Would you be in my vidcast? Do you mind if I record you for my, you mind if I interview you for my video spacecast?
Okay.
You can talk!
Each episode revolves around Clancy, played by Duncan Trussell himself, interviewing these extraterrestrial inhabitants for his spacecast. The psychedelic-inspired story, spanning across absurd worlds, balances humor and philosophy, with each episode encouraging self-reflection as the characters focus on a unique insight into the meaning of life, processing grief, and understanding the world around us. One of the most unique aspects of the show is the way the real conversations are pieced together and occasionally added to in a way that crafts deep, thoughtful dialogue. I remember thinking to myself during my first viewing of the show, damn, this feels so real. I love that it doesn't feel scripted. I later learned that it was in fact not scripted. Each interview is based on actual conversations with real audio taken directly from Trussell's podcast, The Duncan Trussell Family Hour.
Annie, welcome to Midnight Gospel.
It's so cool.
The first question to you is, are you worried because it seems like we're all about to die?
It does feel that way, but I've actually had a lot of deaths in my life. If you've read my stuff, you know my dad died very tragically of brain cancer.
But what's your take on the theme, and what are you getting?
Well, I've actually had a lot of deaths in my life. If you've read my stuff, you know my dad died very tragically of brain cancer 40 years ago when I was young, and
Right. I know what you're talking
You
about.
run into
I've
books
read some books
on
on magic. I mean, Crowley, wow. But Jesus, he sure comes across as somber sometimes.
Yes, he does.
Lord,
And it takes
Lord.
forever
And it
to
takes forever
to sort of crack open what he's even saying.
Basically, my character is this guy Clancy who lives in a place called the Chromatic Ribbon where people use multiverse simulators to simulate universes so that they go inside and harvest the technology and sell it. And so my character has a malfunctioning used multiverse simulator that isn't really working to produce technology. And because it's malfunctioning, every single world in it is going through some kind of apocalypse. And so during the apocalypse, what's going to happen? People are going to do podcasts. People are going to still have conversations. Yeah. So these conversations, we just set them in these surreal universes where shit's melting down and, you know, where like Clancy meets these various people and kind of learns from them.
We're going to dive deep into his show in a moment, but first, let me explain what makes Duncan so unique. One thing people love about him is his infectious passion for conversation, which quickly made him my favorite podcast host. I've never heard anyone express the beauty and profound effects that a thoughtful conversation can have in the way that Duncan has. For all intents and purposes, Clancy is Duncan Trussell. The way he thinks, the sorts of questions he asks, and his genuine inquisitive nature is fundamentally why the show works.
People are just seeing two friends hanging out who like talking to each other.
Yeah, but there's this weird, like you serve as catalyst for each other to go into some crazy places. So it's like it's a balance of curiosity and willingness to not be limited to the constraints of reality.
Yeah, that.
In your exploration.
That's very nice way. It's a very, very nice way of saying that. If you took like a big chunk of sausage and baked it and then like drilled a hole through it and formed a snorkel, you theoretically could swim around sucking air through salted meat. You don't realize like conversations are a psychedelic. And like, sure, you can have like some conversations that are just super funny, make you laugh.
Yeah.
Those are great. But every once in a while, like I've had Jack Kornfield's been on a few times. This is a man who didn't talk for a year straight in a monastery. And these are people who've been trained in a kind of spiritual technology that's been evolved for 2,000 years. When you get around a person like that, you're going to be altered. You have enough of those conversations, you're gonna change.
You get in the world, you're gonna change.
That's the beauty, I think, of podcasting in general. What about those, those people who are still in the forest from whatever house burnt down, whether it's a metaphorical house or an actual house, and they feel completely disconnected and alone. I just, what do they do? Who do you talk to when you've got nobody? They valued public debate back then. Yes. How much they valued people doing this, trying to figure it out, working it out. It was considered the heart of the new America.
Living in a time when disagreements can often lead to hostility and a breakdown in communication, I believe Duncan serves as a light of hope in this polarizing, divisive world. His enthusiasm for conversation has rubbed off on me, so naturally, as I continue to dive deeper into learning about film, my fascination with dialogue in both cinema and real life has exponentially increased. What makes a good conversation? Why do some conversations feel so easy and engaging while others feel paralyzing? What makes a conversation in a show or movie feel real? And why are we sometimes drawn to them? To me, The Midnight Gospel is a masterpiece that highlights the deeply profound and almost magical nature of human conversation. The thought-provoking responses from Clancy's guests, paired with the bizarre universe and animation style, accentuates the beauty of the conversation even more.
What is that system? This seems truly like the conspiracy nobody talks about.
But that's one of the lies of the disease, or of the ego, that if you are well and if you're happy, the jig's up.
Drain the blood, put in the chemicals, put on the makeup, put him in a suit, and essentially sell your dad back to you.
Wow.
Think of forgiveness as for freeing your own heart from these states of grudge and resentment and anger and ill will.
Yeah. Does opening your heart always just hurt, or are you just in a constant state of...
No, it doesn't always hurt. But when it really cracks open, it hurts.
I think conversing in a productive and nuanced way is equally as much a life skill as anything else we make an intentional effort to improve: physical fitness, mental health, diet, or even morning routines. Verbal communication is fundamental to the human condition, and some people have had much better experiences with it than others. I'm sure all of us can think of at least a handful of conversations throughout our life that have shaped how we think about the world. In 2014, there was an article published in The Atlantic titled "My Students Don't Know How to Have a Conversation" by lifelong educator Par Barnwell. He said, quote, "I came to realize that conversational competence might be the single most overlooked skill we fail to teach. Kids spend hours each day engaging with ideas and one another through screens, but rarely do they have an opportunity to truly hone their interpersonal communication skills. Admittedly, teenage awkwardness and nerves play a role in difficult conversations, but students' reliance on screens for communication is detracting and distracting from their engagement in real-time talk. This sentiment is something that I've intuitively felt since I was young, but recently noticed a lot more in myself and younger kids. And this idea that screens negatively affect the way kids communicate goes back much further for me, all the way back to my childhood. When I was younger, I struggled with a stutter for years, and I would go to a speech-language pathologist a couple times a week to try to minimize the effects of the stutter. The stutter is not fully gone. When I'm recording videos, it actually comes back the most when there's like these lights and a camera staring me in the face. The stutter is much more noticeable, and I have to chop these videos up a lot. Clancy. Interestingly, whenever I would play my Game Boy Advance for an extended period of time, my stutter would get drastically worse, to the point where it was almost debilitating. Now, I don't have any hard evidence that my stutter was linked to screen time, but I have anecdotal evidence that the screen fundamentally changed the way I could communicate. I think anyone with younger siblings, or really anybody that has ever spent too much time on the internet, can see this trend that Par Barnwell brought up 9 years ago is still prevalent today. The fact of the matter is, some kids and young adults are struggling socially. So a question that interests me is, where does conversation lie in the internet zeitgeist, and how much interest or focus is being put on the ability to converse in current pop culture and art? On one hand, I'm terrified of how socially inept iPad kids will be in 12 years from now. But on the other hand, I'm inspired by public educators and communicators that are spreading knowledge through long-form discussions. Listening to nuanced conversations with highly accredited scientists, philosophers, and really anyone with a unique life experience is perspective changing. I know for a fact if Lex Fridman, Andrew Huberman, and Duncan Trussell had podcasts 10 years ago when I was in high school, I would have eaten that shit up. I would have been totally obsessed and influenced for the better by what they teach. So to explore what makes conversations so powerful, let me introduce you to some of Duncan Trussell's fascinating ideas and use his series The Midnight Gospel as a case study to explore what makes a conversation work and why a thoughtful conversation can be so profound. Dude, my fucking eyes hurt. There's a light that is so bright and it's right here and I don't know what to do. I don't have a fancy lighting setup, and so I just shine this shit straight into my face for like an hour and a half. There are 4 aspects of conversation that both parties have to engage in to make it work. Throughout history, the core components have been packaged and taught in many different ways, but they all get at the same ideas. In The Midnight Gospel, it feels as if Clancy has maxed out these 5 attributes. He is the LeBron James of interesting conversations. First, humility. Humility is freedom from pride or arrogance. It means to be modest and assume there's something for you to learn in any situation. Every individual knows something that you don't. Clancy is always humble and excited to talk to anybody he has the pleasure of meeting, whether it be the soul bird of a prisoner that bit his own tongue off, or the embodiment of death itself. Although his Spacecast gets broadcasted to approximately 1 viewer, he takes his interviews very seriously and treats all his guests with respect. The close-minded viewer might dismiss Clancy as being silly or scatterbrained, but once you get to know him more, you realize he's just so eager to talk to anybody about whatever they want to talk about.
Right. I've heard different versions of what you're saying. That's cool. The moment I just accepted where I was instead of wishing I was somewhere else, everything just got better. Can you tell us a little bit about how we can cultivate the skill of listening in our own lives? Both parents passing, it was just it was not like this. Mm-hmm. Sometimes to me, I really feel like I lose the ability to listen. I get so caught up in my own bullshit that I can't listen to people anymore. It's like for a second, my thoughts weren't much of anything. What a joy to get to chat with you. Thank you so much for this conversation.
My delight, Clancy.
There are beautiful, wondrous worlds inside these old simulators, full of intelligent beings with stories to tell. And I'm going to interview them and put my interviews online and make a bunch of money and pay you back to suck my dick.
Next up, we have my personal favorite, empathy. Empathy is the capacity to understand or feel what another person is experiencing from within their frame of reference. That is, the capacity to place oneself in another person's position, the key idea being from within their frame of reference. Something that personally drives me nuts more than almost anything on this planet is how many people, especially people who think they're a nice person, forget or ignore what empathy really means. They think that if you disagree or dislike somebody, you cannot feel empathetic towards them, and this is just untrue. You can and should have empathy for literally anyone, regardless of how much you disagree or dislike them. Okay, maybe literally was the wrong word choice. I think there are a few exceptions to that, like, serial killers and people that murder babies and, all that sort of stuff. But generally speaking, empathy wins always. There's a really interesting conversation between Lex Fridman and a FBI hostage negotiator. And the hostage negotiator was saying that he can have empathy for anybody, including Putin, including basically all of the terrible people that you think of that you don't like and don't agree with their views. You can still have empathy for them.
The original definition of empathy was an interpretation of a German word where people were trying to figure out what the artist was trying to convey. It was about assessing art. And so it was always about understanding where somebody was coming from, but not sharing necessarily that same thing. Not agreeing or even liking the other side. Don't even got to like them. Don't got to agree with them. Just straight understanding where they're coming from and articulating it, which requires no agreement whatsoever. That becomes a very powerful tool, like ridiculously powerful.
It's infuriating when people with a particular set of political or moral beliefs shut down an opposing view without displaying any amount of empathy.
Now you see who you really are, filled with fucking rage!
Are you done?
Yeah, I'm done.
Let's take a minute together, okay?
There have been people in my life who won't engage with or talk about complicated, nuanced topics, either because they believe the other side's view to be wrong and invalid, or because they don't want their own ideas to be challenged. Empathy is hugely important, and I think internet echo chambers are making it less and less common. In order to be truly empathetic, it requires listening. Not just hearing the words the other person is saying, but actively listening and trying to understand from the other person's point of view. How can this person be looking at the same world I'm looking at, but coming to an entirely different conclusion? We're often taught about this idea of active listening, but I like the phrase sympathetic listening a bit more. Sympathetic listening means to focus on the feelings and emotions of the speaker, rather than focusing strictly on the message being conveyed through their words. If we can do this, then we can better understand where they are coming from and why they feel the way they do. Clancy is full of empathy. Through the interviews on his Spacecast, his empathy is put on full display by the way he recognizes the emotional states of others. Notice how Clancy always tries to understand and verbalize what his guest is trying to convey, reassuring them that they're on the same page.
Do you think that the reason you ended up imprisoned is because, this sounds so weird, good karma?
Yes.
So you would get your uncle would come in a train.
Yes.
Stuffed with arsenic?
Just not stuffed with sawdust, actually.
So I think that deep listening protects our aliveness too.
Wow, listening is the connection to the universe.
Imagine like a giant net, like a glowing blue net in infinity.
Like a quilt?
No, more like a net.
That's spaciousness.
Cool. Like you're talking about the thing where, I've thought about this a little bit. You could be living in a massive house, but you're still a hoarder. Even though the space is empty, your mind is still filled up with all of the stuff that's making you miserable all the time.
Basically, we're talking about psychological space. Your mind is overcrowded.
That's it, yeah.
There is a moment of deep satisfaction whenever we use our uniquely human ability to share and understand meaning. There are few things more satisfying than knowing that ideas we've expressed are fully understood by another person. The point we can take away from all of this is be more like Clancy. The third component of conversation, which is Clancy's greatest skill, is curiosity.
I'm the president.
Whoa. Cool.
Curiosity is the desire to learn or know about something, to have an inquisitive interest in others' concerns or ideas. Curiosity leads to interesting questions, and interesting questions are what make conversations feel alive and magical. Everyone is curious about different things, and that's okay. Clancy's philosophical inquiries about the nature of existence in the universe will definitely not be engaging for everyone, but I think it's undeniable that the level of curiosity that Clancy displays is ultimately a good thing, and is something worth striving for in whatever topic you may be discussing. Clancy is a master at asking good questions that will elicit a unique and interesting response. I think something we can learn from Clancy is that often the most basic questions are the most profound.
Must ask questions. So much mystery. What's up? Where are the orgies tonight, gang? I popped out of you.
Yes?
And then what happened? What'd you do? Did you look at me? Or how does that work when you have a baby? Whoa, cool, dude. Come on. There's no way to stop the heartbreak. What do you do about that?
You cry. You cry.
Next up, critical thinking. Critical thinking is the ability and eagerness to identify gaps in logic or shortfalls in evidence-based argumentation. Uncovering the hidden presuppositions behind beliefs is an integral part of communication. It's the process of coming to a deeper or truer understanding of a particular topic by asking strong questions that encourage more explanation. Have you ever overheard a conversation between two people, both of which are talking about a topic that they're not too knowledgeable about? Suppose you just passively listen to their conversation. You might notice logical fallacies, contradictions, or flaws in reasoning that one or both of the people engaged in the conversation don't recognize. If a person uses a fallacy and gets called out on it, they have to be able and willing to engage with a back and forth, sometimes difficult dialogue to eventually arrive at the truth. If not, there's no point in even discussing. As a wise man once said, it's hard to win an argument with a smart person, but it's impossible to win an argument with a dumb person. This idea of critical thinking is the foundation of what it means to have a liberal education. In education, this process is called the Socratic method. The Socratic method is a process of dialogue between teacher and students, instigated by continual probing questions of the teacher, in a concerted effort to explore the underlying beliefs that shape the students' views and opinions. This process has been developed and adjusted for hundreds of years, but it's still the most effective way to clearly communicate and teach ideas. But as the great communicators have learned, it doesn't have to be used only in educational contexts. The Socratic method can also be applied to interviews, podcasts, and daily conversations.
We're going to get better at it as a species. And what that is putting away the aggression. Aggression happens when animals feel confronted. We still have that. So you feel confronted in any way, even if it's a small disagreement, some weird animal part of you starts hissing. Some people listen to that and then they're like, fuck. And then they get weird when they're having a debate with somebody because the animal is hissing through whatever they're saying. So if you can put that away and then you look at the person and recognize, this is just me. After a bunch of weird turns, I would have been this person.
Yeah.
And then somewhere in there, you can really have like an actual chat with a person. If the thing inside of them starts hissing, and then that makes the thing inside of you start hissing, then you're basically just having a seizure or something disguised as a conversation. You're just barking. If we are debating with all this aggression, I don't even know if we're human at that moment. I think we're just hissing at each other and pretending what we're saying has some kind of importance in the world. I mean, it would probably be healthier to just like, instead of, angrily fighting with somebody.
At its core, the Midnight Gospel works because it understands the attributes of a strong conversation. There are plenty of shows and movies where the whole premise is two or more characters talking the whole time, and although I personally love these types of stories, they have varying levels of appeal and effectiveness. The Midnight Gospel exemplifies the qualities that can make a conversation fascinating and rewarding by utilizing real conversations between one of the most insightful communicators we have and his thought-provoking guests. Sure, this style of show and the subject matter it explores is inevitably not going to appeal to everyone, but I think the value of shows like The Midnight Gospel is that it takes important, albeit difficult concepts and packages them in a way that is drastically more digestible to people who otherwise would never engage with the ideas being explored in the show. The use of real conversations makes the show feel raw and deeply human, and based on the positive reviews, it's clear that people resonate with it. So the success of The Midnight Gospel begs the question, why isn't stuff like this more common? Are there other shows and movies that attempt to capture reality in a similar way? How real can a show, movie, or any piece of media actually be? In my next video, we'll be exploring the idea of realism in film, because during the process of making the video that you're watching right now, I've learned that The Midnight Gospel, which in some ways has the most realistic dialogue of any show or movie I've ever watched, is largely edited, supplemented, and changed. If you pull back the curtain a bit more, you start to realize that none of our popular culture is realistic. Film and TV are not supposed to be realistic, and more importantly, they can't be. At best, they can capture a representation of reality. More YouTube videos on the regular. I'm having so much fun making these types of videos. I really have just been ignoring views and likes altogether for the first time in my whole life and not getting sad or depressed if a video doesn't do well. I'm just gonna keep making stuff that I think is cool and sharing it with my friends, and if that's all that happens, I'm okay with that. So thank you, strangers on the internet, for watching. This next video is already like half written. I worry it's gonna be a long one, but that's good for you guys. Yeah. Thanks for watching. See you guys next time.